So what I'm going to talk to you today is about North Korea, and the reason that talking about North Korea is important right now is because, of course, there's been two things. One is that there's an escalating nuclear confrontation between North Korea, or officially the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, is its official name, and between North Korea and the United States. And what is often depicted in the media is that the leader of North Korea, namely Kim Jong-un, is a young man. He doesn't, the depiction is that he doesn't know what he's doing, and so what we're expecting is that this is they're going to behave in a very unpredictable manner, and so it's extremely risky for North Korea to be in possession of nuclear weapons. And as North Korea develops not only its nuclear weapons but also its missile delivery systems, then it becomes actually deliverable to a specific target. At least that's the thinking. And of course, I think most of us in this room also know that the man on the other side, namely Donald Trump, is probably even more unpredictable. Just the fact that he's going to put out these words of my nuclear button is bigger than yours is totally nonsensical, because as most of you know, nuclear weapons are what if there is a nuclear exchange, there's going to be vast devastation. Of course, North Korea is a small country, so it is quite possible. The United States does have the capability to obliterate North Korea from the map, but it would also have the capability. In doing that, it would also be absolutely devastating to life in South Korea, in Manchuria, in that southern tip, of Russia, Vladivostok, and eventually, yeah. So the fallout would go everywhere. But I'm talking about the immediate impact is going to be really devastating, not just to North Korea, but to South Korea, to Japan, to that whole region. And I'll get into some of the reasons why that is so, beyond what you might normally hear about. So what we have here is a situation where we have, it's some people who want to project a little bit more of a balanced picture. Will say that, well, we've got two madmen on either side who are both have nuclear triggers. And what I'm going to talk about today is to try to show you how North Korean policy actually has been more consistent over the decades, and what North Korea really wants to get out of this. Why does North Korea have a nuclear program in the first place, and what are their goals in both in diplomacy as well as in terms of saber rattling. Okay, so I guess I have to stand here. Now, this is a very common depiction of the dichotomy in the world today, which I think is a very false one. Namely, that there is a dichotomy between democracy and dictatorship. And this is not just something that is perpetrated by the right, or not just by the mainstream media. This is actually a course at Stanford University by a faculty member who's we would think is fairly intelligent, and still they're depicting they're lumping together all different streams that they consider to be dictatorial or authoritarian. With Darth Vader thrown in there for good humor. But what I'm going to do is, in the process of telling you about North Korea, is that I'm going to paint a slightly different picture about what is the nature of North Korea, the political system, versus, let us say, our political system, and you'll find that it's not such a clear-cut dichotomy between democracy and dictatorship. Now, the reason why nuclear weapons are extremely devastating, particularly over not just what we're talking about is not just the initial blast, right? Because there are three aspects to the explosion of a nuclear weapon. One is the shock wave. The next is the thermal blast that melts everything around the epicenter. And then the third one is the radiation that goes out with that initial blast. The fourth aspect is the residual radiation that remains for hundreds and thousands of years and then is blown up into the atmosphere and carried all over the world. Now, I happen to I got my PhD in medical physics, and one branch of medical physics is nuclear medicine. So I know something about a little bit about the effects of radiation and radioactive materials on life. And one of the things that is not generally told to people is that when you have a fission reaction, so what happens is you take this uranium-235 and enrich it to about at least 95% enrichment. And that's what you hear about all this confrontation between the U.S. and Iran in particular, which was engaged in enriching uranium. So basically, what it is that natural uranium is mostly U-238. So 238 is the atomic weight, but the radioactive, the fissionable uranium is U-235. It's 3 neutrons lighter, and if you concentrate it and then to at least 96%, then it is of a material that when you force it together into a critical mass, it explodes because there is a chain reaction. So here's a neutron that's coming in, hits this uranium-235 nucleus, and then it fissions it into barium and krypton. Although there are other fission products that are possible. Well, actually, they're depicted here. So here's cesium, rubidium, strontium, xenon. So there are many different kinds of fission products, and then it produces 3 more neutrons, which creates a chain reaction. So it just escalates, and of course it escalates in nanoseconds. And so the important thing here is that okay, so barium also is radioactive. It decays, so it has certain other decay products. It puts out radiation, and it has its own toxicity. Krypton, same thing. Cesium. So the point is, it's not just 2 fission products. It's many different fission products, and each one of these has its own decay chain. So what we're talking about is the mess, the radioactive mess that we are left with after a nuclear weapon is exploded, is a lot of different things. It's an alphabet soup of different kinds of unstable isotopes, each with their own types of radiation, each with their own types of toxicity, and that's what makes this thing very difficult. It's impossible to clean it up, right? So that's why the long-term implications of a nuclear weapon are, will live with that country and live in that region for centuries and millennia, and it's not possible to clean it up. I mean, in the case of Fukushima, it was localized, and they could kind of bury it, and they could move people away from Fukushima. But this is not. It's going to spread all over the place, and the isotopes that are generated are much more varied. So that's why it's particularly something that we really as humanity we really need to avoid. Okay, so North Korea has been developing missiles as well, And, North Korea actually follows along the footsteps of a few other countries that have developed nuclear weapons after the P5. So the P5 are the five permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, right? The United States, the Soviet Union, China, which is now Russia, Britain, France, and so the basically these countries, the P5 countries, have promoted a number of treaties, such as the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and then the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, as a means of sort of sealing their lead in the nuclear club and sealing out other countries, right? And North Korea was one of the countries that originally signed the NPT, and Comprehensive Test Ban wasn't relevant because they didn't have anything to test. And then when tensions escalated in 2002, because the United States and South Korea were increasing the number of military exercises. There were actually physical military clashes. Then North Korea withdrew from the NPT and started a program to begin to enrich uranium to bomb quality, and then begin the testing program. But yes.
That was legal withdrawal from the NPT, was it?
Oh yeah. It's because any country that signs on to a treaty can they are exercising their right to withdraw from it. Yeah. But of course, it's an international treaty that the world considers to be good, and we want to limit the spread of nuclear weapons, and so it's not such a good thing. But what I was going to say is that North Korea follows along the footsteps of three other countries that also developed nuclear weapons after the P5, right? So the first one was India, which exploded its first atomic bomb in 1974, right? And then Pakistan followed in 1998, and then Israel at some unknown point. And Israel is the only nuclear power that never tested a nuclear weapon, and there's a reason for that. Okay, Israel is a nuclear power. It is 100% confident that its nuclear weapons will work because it's the only country in which its dual citizens, that means citizens of Israel who are also citizens of the United States, can get a security clearance to work in Los Alamos or the Lawrence Livermore National Lab and get all of our testing results and all of our simulation results and put it into the design of their weapon. But so these, I know in particular that India and Pakistan and Israel, they never signed on to the NPT in the first place, and so they were also legally on the treaty is not binding to non-signatories. And similarly, India, Pakistan, and Israel also have developed their own missiles, so they have delivery systems. But when India and Pakistan, for example, developed the delivery systems and exploded their nuclear weapons, the United States slapped them on the wrist by cutting off military aid for a few months. Right, that was the extent of it. There was some diplomatic chatter, and then the cutting of aid, which was then restored. Some of it was restored in a few months. Some of it was restored within a few years. And this is and of course Israel was never slapped on the wrist. It's a total secret. The United States government refuses to even acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons and delivery systems. In contrast to that, we look at how Iran was treated, and how how North Korea is being treated, that every time they send off a missile, there are more sanctions. Every time North Korea explodes a weapon, there are more sanctions, right? And this has been relentless. I mean, Iran and North Korea have Iran since 1979, North Korea since 1953, have faced a relentless barrage of sanctions. So it's sanctions, it's non-recognition, and it's just an endless stream of rhetoric that these are members of the axis of evil. So, no, in other words, Iran and North Korea have not been treated by the United States. I mean, we say the world community, but it's really led by the United States. North Korea and Iran have not been treated the same way that other post P5 nuclear powers have been treated. Okay, and so this is something that both Iran and North Korea have sought to normalize. They said, why are you treating us differently from everybody else? And it's not only that, but Iran, of course, is right next door to a nuclear power, which is more than twice its size, and next to two other nuclear powers, Russia and India. And North Korea, of course, shares common borders with two nuclear powers, China and Russia, although they don't threaten North Korea. But the United States was the first country to introduce nuclear weapons into the Korean Peninsula, and this was done back in the 60s and 70s. And even today, even though those nuclear weapons have been we think withdrawn from land basing in South Korea, they are still in the submarines that are offshore. So the United States has the ability to, within seconds, hit a target in North Korea from a submarine-launched nuclear-tipped missile. This is a threat. I mean, if you have a hostile nation, there's no peace treaty, there's an armistice, but there's no peace, then the North Koreans still feel threatened. But it's important to put all of this in historical context. So we go back. So let me go back to just very briefly, a little bit of Korean history that's important. So the first thing is that Korea was a monarchy for well over 1,000 years, right? And so that's the historical background, and so the Koreas did not have a democratic tradition before modern times. That's one thing. And so when you have a monarchy, there is always this reverence for the monarch. Okay, it's sort of built into the system, built into the culture. In 1910, Japan invades Korea and colonizes it. All right, it colonizes it, sets up a puppet government in 1932, and that is the point at which Kim Il-sung, sort of the father of North Korea, begins organizing a guerrilla movement to an armed struggle against the Japanese occupation. Now, this Japanese occupation was at times extremely brutal. So there are hundreds of thousands of Koreans who died during the time of the occupation, and we know that this is not an isolated case. We all remember the Nanjing massacre when the Japanese invaded China in 1937. 300,000 people died in Nanjing alone. So there's a pattern here. But more importantly, equally importantly, I want to point out something very interesting, and this factor shapes Korea's history in the North, in particular, and that is that when the Japanese set up this puppet government, one of the things they did is they took control of all the land. So they took control of all the land and basically gave the title to that land, rural and urban, to the Japanese rulers. And so when Japan was defeated in 1945, there were no owners. The Japanese were thrown out, and there were no owners. It would have been a massive undertaking to try to determine the title of the lands and return it to their original owners. Now Kim Il-sung, by that time, of course, was convinced that Korea should go in the socialist path, and so it was actually very convenient, because now the state, in defeating the Japanese, takes control of everything and now controls all of this land. And it has a basic decision to make. Do we go in the direction of land to the tiller, for example? Do we give land back to the peasants, or do we go straight to socialism and collectivize? And so the party's decision was collectivize. And so today, North Korea, in agriculture, 80% of agriculture is in collective farms or communes, and 20% of agriculture is state farms. Okay. And the other thing that happened was that, and for that I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Korean War. Okay, because that's another very important historical context. So, okay, Japan is defeated in 1945. In 1948, I mean, there is a functioning government in the north that is under the control of the Korean Workers' Party. The Korean Workers' Party, actually, there are two parties. Before 1948, they merged in 1948 to form the new Korean Workers' Party, and then the South, elements in the South, decide to declare independence, and the result of that is actually 1950, and then in the North, the decision is that we can't allow them to secede, and they attack the South. So normally, what you hear in the West is that, well, the reason for the beginning of the Korean War is there was an aggression from the North. But there's a reason for that aggression, because the country was being split, and every Korean wants a united Korea. The United States came and entered the war, and in 1950, one of the early battles was the Battle of Sinchon. So Sinchon is an area that is just north of the current demilitarized zone. The current border is the border between North and South Korea is characterized by a demilitarized zone. I'll get into that later. But in this battle, there was 3,000 people died. There was a lot of brutality, and according to the North Korean depiction, there were people were buried alive. This is an example of people being buried alive in that battle, and these were mostly civilians. And there still are some eyewitnesses. I met some of the eyewitnesses who were telling their stories about the Battle of Sinchon. There is a propaganda aspect to it, and I want to mention this because everything is not so straightforward. And that is that the North Korean version of this is that the U.S. troops themselves were directly engaged in these atrocities. Looking at multiple sources, I have a tendency to doubt that, and the reality is that South Korean forces were the actual people who committed the atrocities. But I think that the reason for the propaganda, for adjusting things a little bit, is because what they want to do is they want to preserve a pathway to reunification. They can't do that if they accuse people in the South of all kinds of atrocities. So there is some manipulation. I want to admit that. Okay. Now, later on in the war, the war, of course, lasted until July of 1953, and Pyongyang, for example, if you take the big cities, I mean, Pyongyang was the largest city in the north. It had a population of about 400,000. And these were some of the bombs that the United States dropped on Pyongyang. More than 400,000 bombs were dropped by the United States on Pyongyang. So that means more than one bomb per person. More than one bomb per person. The result was that Pyongyang was leveled. Okay, there was not a single building that was usable. Nobody could live in any building in the whole of Pyongyang, and most of it was just leveled like this. It looked just like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So this is a problem, right? How do you provide housing for the people of North Korea when all of the housing has been destroyed? Okay, so you could simply say, okay, to everybody, we'll give you a little aid, we'll give you a little materials, go build your own house. They could have done that. But this was something, in order to go from zero housing in the urban centers to having some kind of housing for people. And by the way, people were living in tents, people were living in caves. I mean, there was no other place where people could go. And so basically what they did is they said, okay, let us organize this as a country. The state led by the party will organize this for the whole country, and we are going to build this housing together in a systematic way. So basically, after July of 1953, the army, the People's Liberation Army, was organized to assist in the construction effort, and every able-bodied person was mobilized to build housing and to build buildings. And that's how it came to be. And this is why you have, this is the only country in the world. This is the only country in the world where all of the land is state-owned and all of the buildings are state-owned. Okay, if you go to China, of course, it's mostly privately owned now. If you go to Cuba, the land is state-owned, but many of the buildings are privately owned. So Korea is the only place where it is that way. The state owns all the housing. It rents the housing out to people for free. So their rent is zero. So that's how it came about. I mean, it's because this is a legacy. This is a legacy of the Japanese occupation. Okay, so this is just simply the DMZ, and what I mentioned earlier is that you have a border, and then the demilitarized zone is 2 kilometers from the border to the south and from the border to the north. So that means that there's a 4-kilometer zone of demilitarization where nobody is supposed to go in there. There are mines in there, but soldiers are by the armistice agreement are banned from being in that demilitarized zone. So there's no face-to-face confrontation between North Korean and South Korean troops. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but these are just the North Korea's nuclear tests, and so they started from something that's very small, which I don't know why this is. We have to fix that. So, and then finally, there's some there's been a lot of controversy in the West about whether some of these were actually nuclear successful nuclear tests, because this was very small. It's actually it's actually hard to make something that's a 1 kiloton equivalent of TNT explosion, because you need to have a critical mass. If you have a critical mass, it's going to be at least 10 kilotons. So it's probably something that fissioned, but did so incompletely. So it was a kind of an incomplete test. And
It was 2006.
2006, right? October 2006. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 15, between 10 to 15 kilotons. And then, nevertheless, whatever North Korea has done are very small compared to bombs that were made by the Soviet Union and the United States. Okay, so the Korean ones are here, right? And then their largest one is that one, which was the fusion, the hydrogen bomb. I don't need to get into this, but this is just the complexity of a modern U.S. warhead. This is the W-88 that is on the Trident, the Trident submarine, and this, by the way, this warhead is, without the plutonium and uranium, is assembled right here at Lockheed Martin at Building 181, and yeah. Okay, so North Korea. This is the map of North Korea. South Korea is to the south. North Korea has a population of about 25 million, and South Korea has a population of 50 million. So South Korea is twice the size of the North. I traveled from this border through to the capital Pyongyang and into the center. So this. I was there in 2015. Yeah. So now these are our children at the Pyongyang Children's Palace, and I have never seen performances like these by a large groups of children, except in socialist countries. I've seen this at the Shanghai Children's Palace. I've seen this at the Hanoi Children's Palace. I've seen it in Cuba. I've seen it in the Soviet Union. I've never seen anything comparable to it in the West. And so there's an amazing ability to organize children and to get them to perform at such a high level. And I think this is aided by the fact that children in North Korea don't have all the distractions that our children have here in the U.S. But I pondered this question about, okay, this is a show in the sense that they're very proud to show this off to foreign visitors. But I pondered the question that if it were fully a show, if it were there primarily for show, they would probably have an equal number of boys and girls, right? And that's not the case in Pyongyang. That's not the case in Shanghai. That's not the case in Hanoi, and it's not the case in Cuba. And the girls typically outnumber the boys by 15 to 1 or 20 to 1. And it's just choice. I mean, this is allowing kids to choose what they want to do. And just like here, I mean, you find that in dance and certain other fine arts, girls go into it much more than boys do, and it's the same thing in North Korea. But these are these kids who are singing and playing these instruments with amazing perfection. Now, what does the country invest in, right? What is the if you were to take a cross section of small towns, what do you think is the biggest building in the town? Schools. Yeah, it's not the Walmart. Okay, so this is a school. Of course it's a new school. It's not even in the center of town. This is at the edge of. Actually, this is a medium-sized town. It's at the edge of Kaesong, but the kids who go here are mostly kids from the countryside, because right next to this school are agricultural fields, and so this is the kind of school that rural kids are attending. I mean, just look at the investment in this school, and ask yourself the question: are these kids starving? Do they have no books? Do they have no clothing? I mean, this is the picture that we get. We get the picture, if you listen to our government, that the whole of North Korea is starving, and Kim Jong-un is using all the resources of the country to launch missiles, while his people are starving. Okay, so there is a little bit of truth to the starvation. And that was a famine that happened in 1996, spilled over a little bit into 1997. And that was real. I mean, it was a combination of factors, because there was flooding, there was drought. That was also after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So one of the major trading partners of North Korea had collapsed, and so it was a difficult period. And if you add all that together, this famine was a terrible thing, and 300,000 people died in that famine. The stories that they tell about the famine are that how they coped with it was that the old people, okay, you got family, you got these extended families with 3 or 4 generations living together, and basically what the old people, the most elderly generation said is that, look, there's only this much food. Feed the children first. Feed the able-bodied parents first. Feed the pregnant mothers first, and then these old people, some of them died in that famine. So that was the priority. But the famine is over. And with the problem is that we get these so-called defectors who come out of North Korea, and they're telling these stories about why did they defect. Well, they're defecting because of famine, because my family can't feed themselves. And so there's a lot of misinformation that is coming out from that, because I looked around and I just did not see any evidence of famine, of malnutrition, of people who are ill-clothed. These are children on a school field trip. There are people in North Korea have the same desire for amusements, and there's an amusement park in Pyongyang and smaller ones in some of the other cities. And this is something that is, I've showed this photo, and this is part of the flyer, because this depicts something that is not staged. Okay, so this is just simply people in a park who are, what they're doing is these are ordinary people. They're not dressed up, and they are watching some spontaneous dancing that is taking place in the park. So somebody has brought a music loudspeaker, and people are dancing, and they're just watching and having a nice afternoon. This is after a marriage, and what they've done is the marriage didn't take place here. This is a tourist hotel where I stayed, and it's true. Then the average Korean cannot afford to stay in this hotel for foreign tourists, and that is because of currency manipulation by the world capitalist system. I get into that later, but the point I want to make here is that people are still enjoying the things that people have always enjoyed for generations, dressing in their traditional costume, having a nice day, celebrating the marriage, and having the family get together. So none of this, there is no truth to the notion that the North Korean regime breaks up families and controls everything that people do in their lives. So there are, I don't know exactly how many, but there are. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about tourism, since you asked the question. So tourism to North Korea has been very limited in the past, and if you go back, let's say 10 years ago, in 10 years ago, the total volume of foreign tourism was about 5,000. It was really minuscule. And when I went in 2015, that had risen to 100,000. And so they realized that they need to open up, but the opening up is not just from the Korean side, okay? So one of the things you hear about here is that North Korea is, quote unquote, the hermit kingdom. Okay, the hermit kingdom is as if they are kind of, hiding from the rest of the world and isolating themselves from the rest of the world. Where does the term hermit kingdom come from? It actually comes from Imperial Korea. Okay, before the Japanese occupation, it was known as the hermit kingdom, right? That's why the term kingdom, and because it was isolated and it was and that also explains why you have the racial purity in Korea, is that there has not been racial mixing. You don't have people even from Manchuria going into Korea and intermarrying there. So there are different aspects to the isolation after the Japanese occupation. So one is that there are these threats. I mean, just like when after the Russian Revolution in 1917, after the Chinese Revolution in 1949, there were all these external threats, and so these countries had to protect themselves from infiltrators, from spies, from assassination attempts, and so there is that aspect of self-protection. But the other aspect, remember, is that from the beginning of the Korean War, from 1950, that the United States has imposed, the sanctions, the non-recognition, and the refusal to trade, so the blockade on North Korea. So this is the other reason, and of course I remember that when this was many years ago. They don't do it anymore, but in the many decades ago, my U.S. passport was marked not valid for travel to North Korea, to Communist China, to Vietnam, and there's one other place. I don't remember whether it was Albania or what, but there were 4 countries that it was printed on our passports, and so most Americans didn't go there, but that was a travel restriction that was imposed from the outside. Now I went to China anyway. I defied it, even though my passport was written that way, and many people had to do that to go to Cuba. But so most of it, actually, if you think of what is the balance of the isolation of North Korea, and I would say most of it is because of the outside world imposing this blockade and these sanctions and discouraging their own citizens from traveling there. And of course, the United States has been more discouraging of that travel than other countries. So, for example, there are tour agencies that organize tours to North Korea in Britain, in China, in Italy. So it's easier to go from those countries. And then the goal that they were saying is that they want to further expand tourism, build more hotels, and you do see construction to expand tourism to about 1 million by, I don't know whether they'll make it, but to expand tourism to 1 million by the end of may not be at the end of the decade, but a few years after the end of this decade. So these are just simply some people who are some women who are dressed in traditional costume to line the streets and welcome a parade, and this parade was on the one of the anniversaries of the Korean Workers' Party. Okay, the city of Pyongyang, it wasn't too encouraging. It looks beautiful, but I woke up. This is the first morning, and I wondered, okay, what is this smog or is it fog? Because I just flown in from China, and of course in China this stays there all day. In fact, there are days in China when you look. I remember going to the Olympic complex in Beijing, and some of the Olympic buildings were there about less than a football field in front of me. I could not see them. I could not see them at all. So anyway, this lifted, and so it's mostly moisture, and there is pollution, of course, but the pollution is mainly from mining, which I'll show you in a moment. So there's a lot of high-rise buildings. So this is, they obviously have construction technology. This giant building here is 100 stories tall, and it is to be a hotel. Now, unfortunately, it's been under construction for over 20 years, and the reason for that is because it has a foreign partner, and that foreign partner from time to time gets blocked by the sanctions that the U.S. imposes. China? No, it's a European partner. Yeah, it's a European development company, and so they do a little bit of work, and then the sanctions are ratcheted up, and they have to stop.
Sharat,
yes.
If all the buildings are owned by the state,
Mm-hmm.
is that what you said?
Yes.
And how do they get a development partner to come in?
So there are exceptions.
There that development partner?
Well, there are exceptions. So it's just like a lot of just like many of the hotels in Cuba are state owned, but a foreign partner comes in to operate the hotel, right? So for example, there's a I don't know, let's see, a Hilton is there, right? And so the Hilton has a lease and an operating contract, right? Yeah. Now, so this is just sort of a general view of Pyongyang, and you can see that some of these buildings are factories. So there's a good deal of industry. Now, the industry is not very advanced technologically, but even according to the United Nations figures, the industry represents about somewhere around 22% of GDP, and that's quite respectable. So this is not an unindustrialized country. It's not a backwater, and in fact, it's a industry contributes probably a little bit more to the GDP of North Korea than it does to the economy of the United States. Agriculture. Now, because these are collective farms, whenever you see work in the fields, it's not one lone farmer, it's a group. It's a collective effort to harvest the wheat, right? And do other tasks. Sometimes women take their children into the field. There's some machinery. This is probably a winnowing machine. Tractors. So there are three kinds of tractors. Some of the older ones are Russian made, and some of the newer ones are, I guess I don't have that, are from China, and then Korea actually makes some of its own vehicles, both cars, tractors, buses. I mean, it's quite an accomplishment for an economy of only 25 million people. Now, in terms of infrastructure, I'm taking this photograph from the main highway, and I'm looking at a small town here, and I mean this is probably a town of maybe, my guess is 15,000 population. Okay, and you can see that it has some kind of industry, either industry or agro industry. It has a local bridge crossing this river. So there's redundant infrastructure, and it's just not that underdeveloped. Here's another small town or large village, and it has, I'm not sure whether these are chicken farms, but is clearly some kind of state agricultural or state industrial investment in this small town. Okay, so this is an agricultural area. You see what predominates here are agricultural fields. What is unusual about this picture? Remember, this is Asia. Okay, so look at the houses here. This is a village. These are farmers who live in these houses. What's unusual about the houses? If you think of an Asian village, you think of an assortment. An assortment of buildings, right? So some buildings will be that you have rich peasants and they will have two-story houses made out of concrete, and you have poor peasants with living in mud huts, and every house is different. But here you see this absolute uniformity. You've got apartments here, mid-rise apartments. You've got single-family homes here. And by single family, I mean that includes extended families, but it's a single family. It's not like two unrelated families living in one building, and they're all the same. They're all the same. Why? Because this is state housing. This was built by the state. Yes, you had a question. Okay, so well, it's a legitimate question because most people here do not know what the reality is. So my answer to it is this: is that first of all, people are there isn't a lot of economic inequality in North Korea. So everybody in this village has similar kind of housing. The difference between the apartments and the houses is the family size, the household size. Now, so it's not a question of, for the most part, it's not a question of people wanting to move up to a more expensive house, right? I mean, there is the issue of, okay, my family is too big now, I need a bigger place to live. And so that, I mean, they do have to go through a process of applying for it, and then they'll get a transfer. Or if they have a new job that in another part of town or maybe in another city, then again they have to go through a process of exchanging housing from one place to another, and they may, because housing it's kind of like there's enough housing, but it's just enough, and so they may go into for a few months into some housing that's a little bit smaller than what they want. They'll have to wait there, and then until another house opens up, and then they can move in there. So that's kind of the way that it works. There's no homeless. It's free. There's no homeless, zero homeless. Okay, so.
To have a lifestyle where you were able to stay in that hotel and you from the sun. I mean, I don't know. You just say there's no uprisings for new technology, no rising for access to technology, there's no uprising for educational change, there's no uprising for.
Well, no, I mean okay, so the question is whether there's an uprising, a protest, or for discontent, yeah, to have something better than what they have. Well, the first thing is that the impetus for that often comes because people see that somebody else in the same society has that. Right, so somebody else has has electronics that I don't have, or has a big house or a big mansion that I don't have, and that, for the most part, is not the case in North Korea, and the fact that there's a hotel there for foreign tourists. I mean, people understand that, okay, that it's for the foreign tourists to earn foreign exchange revenue, and it's not for ordinary people to live in. So it's not like it's not like a political leader gets to live in that hotel. No Korean gets to live in that hotel. Now there is a question of old housing versus new housing, right? So you've got districts in the cities which have consist of housing that was built 50 years ago. Okay, and the quality of the concrete sometimes is not the best. It's crumbling. Maybe the piping isn't working. So people, of course, would prefer to have new housing over some of the old housing, and that is, you see the new housing going up, and then over time these people are being moved, or given an opportunity to move from the old housing to the new housing. So, but yeah, there's no. In any case, there's no rent. But I think people understand. As long as people understand the process, as long as people understand that over time everybody's going to get better housing, then they're reasonably okay with it.
So, can you get a better job when your kids are growing up and going to school? How is it decided what they're going to do? Can they break away from the family and get a higher education and get a better job?
Sure. Absolutely, because the education is according to their academic performance, and education is free. So there's no question of not being able to be educated because they can't afford it, or because they're going to accumulate this massive student debt. So education is free up through postgraduate. Healthcare is 100% free. It's a full, single-payer healthcare system for everybody. So, it's.
They just grow up different, huh? They don't have the competitive mind that we do. They don't have they have the working together.
Well, they do have there's a culture of working together. It doesn't mean that there isn't competition, because there are exams to get into the university, and so there's a competition there also. And sports, sure. The kids who get to perform at the Pyongyang Children's Palace are the best ones, right? So there is still competition. But there's also a sense that, okay, we're going to do this in a way that works best for the whole country.
Is there a distinction in class or accommodations or whatever between the ruling class and the monarch? What's Kim Jong-un's official title? Is he president?
He's the president, yeah.
He's not elected, is he?
Okay, so that's a longer story.
Does the president live in a palace as opposed to all these guys?
Well, remember that where he lives is there's an official residence. So that official residence is, of course, it's owned by the state, and it's not his personal residence. So that when if he were to leave office, okay, he would have to move out, and he would have to go, just like the governor's mansion, right? So when he only lives there so long as he holds that office, and it's also that residence is also for certain types of official gatherings, right? So it's not an ordinary residence, right? There's that. There is another question of certain types of privileges, right? So in the process of doing their jobs, a high-level government official may get an official car to perform certain official functions, right? So, for example, if that official has a meeting in Kaesong, okay, then they will be given a car to attend that meeting, but they don't own that car. It's not for their private use, and it's only for the duration that they hold that office, right? Okay, so maybe I should mention something about the political system, because I wanted, it's a good lead-in to the question of dictatorship versus democracy. So in this country, I think you know the system that we directly elect our representatives at all levels of government, and nevertheless, the people who get elected to the highest levels of government do not necessarily do what we want them to do, right? I mean, even in Congress, we elect people to Congress who very frustratingly don't do what we want them to do. They don't pass a budget on time. They don't come to some kind of an agreement to pass immigration reform, and so on. And that's because once they get elected, there is a certain discontinuity. There's a certain gap between the voters and the elected officials. And in this country, it's the kind of the sort of expectation is that, well, let the representatives do their job, and the only time that the voters really get involved is before the election. And of course, you know, we cannot have a viable democracy unless there's continued voter involvement in between elections. Okay, so that's our system. And then to the state apparatus. The higher you go on the state apparatus, the more probability there is that state apparatus will act in ways that are repressive, right? Such as banning Muslims from coming into the country, right? Or putting protesters in Washington, D.C. in jail for exercising their right of free assembly. So we violate a lot of the democratic practices that are embodied in the Constitution. In North Korea, what happens is that there are elections for local bodies. So for neighborhood committees, for municipalities, the representatives in the municipal councils are elected by the people in that municipality or in that municipal district. And then what happens is that the municipal councils will elect representatives to the next level, presumably the county, and then at the county level they elect representatives to the state, the provincial level, and provincial to the national level. And this is also true it's true in China, it's true in Cuba, and what happens though is that because you've got a whole series of levels. It's just like, we think of it this way. When many of you worked in some kind of a larger organization, either a government agency or a corporation, how much accountability well, of course you don't have elections, but how much of communication even is there between the CEO and the workers at the bottom of the corporation? So the more layers you have, the less interaction there is between the top and the bottom, and that's where the disconnect is, and that's why people at the bottom often feel that the top is being authoritarian. But this happens whether it is in a direct election type of democracy, or the North Korean model, which I call a pyramidal electoral system, right? So yes.
But he wasn't elected. He just came in because his father, and he even killed his brother.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens there is that there is a basically what happens there is that the Politburo, the central committee of the party, and then there's a Politburo that is kind of like an executive committee. So these are the bodies that make these decisions, but they are also accountable at some level to larger bodies of the National Assembly, the Party Congress, and so on, and so they cannot do something that is totally out of line from what the broader Party Congress wants or from what the National Assembly wants. So there is some accountability there, but again, so what we're looking at now is also this imperial legacy, the imperial legacy of almost deifying a leader, just like the emperor. So in that sense, we have a carryover from Imperial Korea, in which the leader is in some measure deified. I mean, it's there's some justification for the way people feel about in particular about Kim Il Sung, because he provided the leadership to free Korea from the yoke of colonialism, and also to end the Korean War, right? So anyone who does that is going to be held in extremely high esteem, but when you add to that the deification of the emperor, then it gets magnified. And so that's why, when Kim Jong-il, the father of Kim Jong-un, when he died, you remember the images on television of people weeping. I mean, adults weeping profusely at that, and this is an imperial legacy. Yeah.
They do call themselves a democratic country.
Yeah. Right. So that's why. I mean, so there is this pyramidal democratic structure, and it's imperfect, but that's why they call it. That's why they call it democratic. So what I mean is, that's what I just said. So you've got voters, and then they elect like municipal councils. The municipal councils, the collectivity of municipal councils within a county elects a county body, and the county bodies elect the provincial body, right, and then the national.
And there are fewer and fewer people at each level, so
Right.
it's a pyramid.
Right, it's a pyramid. Yeah. Right. Okay. So one of the things that the DPRK did in 1953. So this is earlier on than the same thing that happened in China, which was to give to allocate to peasants or the cultivators a private plot of land. Okay, so this happened in 1953, and in China it did not happen until after the Cultural Revolution. But the result of that is, so what they have is a small plot of land in which the members of the commune can cultivate food for their own use, and if there's a little bit of surplus, they're allowed to sell it on a small free market. Okay, and so this is what this is. This is excess produce from private plots that people are selling on the roadside. I don't know whether there's pesticides, but they don't have Monsanto there. Yes.
Are the bicycles that we see privately owned? What
Yeah.
is the range of private ownership?
So
No houses, no cars.
right. So bicycles and furniture and all of these things are private. These are personal property. Yes. Just some more factories in Pyongyang. Now so this is a mine. This is a metallurgical mine, and so even though South Korea is much more industrialized, but in 90% of the mining takes place in the north, and so mining is a very important part of the North Korean economy, and there's a lot of pollution from it as well. Now, one experiment that was initiated some years ago. Now, this is something that depends on the character or the political inclinations of the government in the South. Okay, so because it's the South Korea, officially the Republic of Korea, has had governments that, some that want more economic cooperation with the North, that want to take measures, incremental measures towards reunification, towards cultural exchange, and then other governments are hostile. They're just like the one that the previous one to the President Moon, and one of those phases resulted in the development of the Kaesong Industrial Park. So it's a park where something like 52 South Korean companies set up factories to employ North Korean labor. Something like 50,000 North Korean workers worked in that park when it was open. And then the previous president of South Korea withdrew from that, so the park closed. And now with the Olympic diplomacy, there's hope that this park can be reopened because it's beneficial to both sides.
They pay them? They pay the North Koreans?
Yeah. So right. So what happens is that the South Korean companies make an investment in this Kaesong Industrial Park, which is like an economic export zone. So an export zone is it's a special zone where you can only bring certain things in and out. It's there are certain tax exemptions. Okay, so in this case, it's a zone where the South Korean companies can set up their factories. They make the investment. They pay the North Korean workers, go into the zone. They work. They get paid. And then the South Korean companies can take the product out. Yes.
How is it similar or different from what was done on the Mexican border?
Well, on the Mexican border, there were not actual zones. So the maquiladoras, I think, what you're referring to, they just simply set up along the border because that is the place where there's the least amount of transportation that's required to feed the U.S. market, and also because some of these factories have inputs from the U.S. Spare parts. I mean, parts that for automobiles might come from the U.S. So logistically, it's advantageous to put them on the border. But these were not special zones. Yeah.
South Koreans resent the North Koreans being employed by them.
Did this?
Outsourcing.
No, because these are jobs that South Koreans don't really want to do, right? I mean,
Otherwise they'd be doing them.
yeah, because South Korea. I mean, we will hear a lot about the South Korean miracle, right? In the sense that South Korea went from being an absolute third world country in the 1950s to this first world country today. I mean, it looks like Europe if you go there today.
So they have
This is
family,
actually in North Korea.
This is in North Korea. Yeah.
they have family members.
They could. It's possible. It's possible. Yeah. Because when the DMZ was when the country was partitioned in 1950, the families were split. Families were split for sure. I want to talk a little bit about this because this is an image that you're going to see when in articles over here about North Korea. So what we're looking at here is Manchuria over here, That is in Russia over there, and probably Khabarovsk, and this is South Korea. And so this is North Korea right here, and that's Pyongyang. Yeah, it's not good. And so the question is, are they living in darkness? Okay, so that's the narrative, is that that this is so poor that people are living in darkness. They have no electricity. And I'm a photographer, and what you have to do is you have to travel to Seoul, and you have to travel to Harbin in Manchuria to understand this. And so what happens in Seoul and in Harbin and in other large Chinese cities is that wherever there's a river, okay, so we've got these high-rise buildings, and unlike here in the Bay Area, these high-rise buildings are illuminated for light shows, right? And so I was in Chongqing 2 years ago, and I was trying to do some calculations on what is the luminous magnitude of these unnecessary illuminations on the outsides of buildings. And I came to the conclusion that the external illuminations in those buildings was 2 orders of magnitude above the normal illumination from the city. 2 orders of magnitude. That means 100-fold, 100 times brighter than the lights that you get from the buildings in San Jose. Okay, now, if you understand photography, you understand that the dynamic range of any kind of photographic image is much less than the human eye. And so you can adjust this image to make this thing black out and show these as bright. And I think that's what's happening. And then you add to that the fact that street lighting in North Korea is not very bright. So when I was taking photographs and doing videos in the streets of North Korea at night in the city, I found that I had a hard time doing that. I really had to crank up the ISO speed on my cameras to like 30,000 to get a decent image on the streets of like Kaesong at night. I mean, it's illuminated, but it's just not very bright. So that explains what's going on in this picture. Electricity. So there are lots of sources of electricity, but they're small. So this is a river, and the drop on this at this dam is about 40 feet. So this powerhouse is there, but it doesn't generate that much. And what you find is that a lot of apartment buildings are now you'll see small solar panels on apartment buildings. And so what these are for is just emergency lighting. It's there's a little battery, and you find this in all countries where in Asia where there are power outages, load shedding. So in India we have these. So there's just enough power that is generated from that for emergency lighting in case the power is shut off. Now this is one of the most amazing things that I've been to. This is officially it's Pyongyang Vegetable Science Institute. Now it's categorized as a state farm. So it has 2 functions. One is to do research on new varieties of vegetables and fruits that can be grown in the Korean environment. And so there's a whole section there where they bring in these seeds from all over the world and grow them there, and then look for the kinds of soil conditions or hydroponic gardening, whatever is appropriate that will make these grow, and then they decide, okay, is this an appropriate seed for propagation in North Korea? But apart from that, it's also a production center, and this is a gigantic greenhouse. This is a gigantic greenhouse that is many hectares in size, and it's one of 150 such greenhouses. So this is actually huge. But what's amazing is that unlike ordinary greenhouses that we know about here, there's some pretty advanced technology for irrigation, for chemical conduits, for fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, and it's really a stunning building here. And you see, this is, I think, hydroponic gardening. These are beanstalks, young beanstalks. These are people reading a newspaper in a metro station. Okay, so this is one of those areas where even I would be very critical of what's happening in North Korea, and that is you have people who are. This is the National Library. This is the National Library, and so anyone from the public can go into the National Library and look on the internet. Problem is that it's only a North Korean intranet. Okay, it cannot see websites outside of the country, and so I would be critical of it, but I also at the same time have to say that this is a country that is under constant threat, and so it's not very easy for them to sort of let go and of that.
Have they ever been afraid that Russia might try to take them over, or is China?
No. I mean, Russia has. Of course. I mean, the Soviet Union has, supported them, but in terms of what Russia would do, there's no indication that Russia has any kind of hostile intent on North Korea. In terms of China, I mean, China's attitude is that let it prosper, because prosperity is stability. Okay, so the threat is of course from the United States. It is from certain elements in South Korea, but not. Again, there are strong political streams in South Korea that favor reunification, and for that, there has to be stability. There has to be a viable economy in the north. There's some hostility from Japan, but that has to do with, it's more general than just, it's historical. I mean, even every time China has a commemoration of the Nanjing massacre, Japan goes ballistic. So, yeah.
So what's our problem?
So our problem. Okay. So what's the problem?
What's the bug under our skin?
Okay, so what's the problem with the United States? Why does the United States insist on this boycott, sanctions, non-recognition, isolation? And it has to do with the fact that the United States has never, the U.S. government has never been able to reconcile with the existence of non-capitalist societies in the world. Okay, because a non-capitalist society is one where the United States and its companies cannot invest. It's not an open market. I mean, if you look at, this is part of a longer story, and I don't know whether I have time to talk about it. But when the Soviet Union fell, then the same thing happened in Eastern Europe, and here you can see how the World Bank, for example, served as an instrument of the U.S. government and the world capitalist system. Because what the World Bank did is they made a qualitative shift in the kind of projects that they were doing. It used to be that if you look at the World Bank in 1980, right, it was doing development of big dams. It was doing irrigation projects in East Africa. It was doing development projects like that, right? The fundamental shift in the World Bank after 1990 was restructuring. It was restructuring the economies of Eastern Europe to make them compatible with the West. To for example, develop stock markets. Okay, World Bank was doing that. Develop stock markets. So, and of course, North Korea is one of those countries that is, the most resistant to that. I mean, Cuba is not going to open up to a stock market, but they're willing to allow a little bit of very, very small private enterprise. And so North Korea is this target, and then of course Iran is a target for a very different reason. It has a private economy, but it is resistant to following the dictates of the U.S. government. But that's essentially why. But it's a question of the economic system, and also that the U.S. government could not tolerate any kind of socialist models that would be remotely successful. And so, I mean, a part of it also has to do with the world capitalist system, because what happens with the world capitalist system is that when you have a socialist economy, the world capitalist system devalues the currency of that country because it's not investable, right? And so every time there's a nationalization, in for example in Venezuela or something like that, the currency falls because the world capitalist system says that this currency is no good. We can't invest there, so sell the currency, and that's why in North Korea, if you look at the official exchange rate, it's something outrageous, and that explains why there's a huge what we call purchasing power parity ratio between what a dollar will buy in the U.S. versus what it will buy in North Korea. So it looks like, okay, North Koreans work for these tiny wages, and yet if you look at it in the North Korean economy, those wages are good for for what they need, for buying food, for buying clothing, for going out to the park, for public transportation, and they don't need to buy housing, they don't need to pay for health care, but it doesn't mean that they're poor. It just means that it's the whole purchasing power parity is much lower, and so it works for them. Okay. Yes.
This is a Women's International League for Peace and Freedom
Yes.
meeting, and I can't help but notice the gender imbalance in that picture.
Okay.
Could you help me understand that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, there are. I don't know why that is. There are some women there in the back. Actually, they're on the other side for the most part. I mean, yeah, but they're free to go there, and you're going to find these kinds of imbalances everywhere. And I'm not trying to say that, I'm not trying to defend it. I mean, we can. No, religion. It's almost nil. It's almost nil. I mean, there's officially people can practice religion, but people choose not to. So 90%, more than 90% of the population is basically atheist. Yeah. This is the Korean Workers' Party memorial that was built on the 50th anniversary of the party in 1998, and it has the symbols of communist parties are the hammer and the sickle. So the hammer is the symbol of the worker, the sickle is the symbol of the peasant, and in Korea they have the writing brush. The writing brush. So the writing brush, of course, is the symbol of the intellectual. So it's a recognition that there were three classes. There were three classes that were important to the revolution, that supported the revolution, which was the workers, the peasants, and the intellectuals.
They don't have journalists, do they?
Well, there are newspapers, but they're all state-owned newspapers, and state-owned radio, state-owned media. Yeah.
Sharat, people's tired.
Yes. Yeah. So it's right. So it's because these are groups. These are. This is okay. The context is this parade, that's taking place on the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of the Korean Workers' Party. So these people are either participating in the parade, or they are lining the parade route. So that's why the uniformity. And this is, I mean, okay. So these are women in the Korean People's Army, and but it's of course not representative, because most of the people in the army are men, and I'm told that service in the army is voluntary, and now there must be some requirement for people to serve in the reserves, because the reserves are so huge, and a lot of it is made about the size of the army as to imply that Korea is a very militarized state, because it has an army of 1.3 million in a population of 25 million, and so that means one person in 20 is a member of the armed forces, and it's because the whole way things are organized is different. So yes, these people are in the armed forces, and so they stand by in case that there is an invasion, but they're not full timers in the armed forces. So most of the time they're in their home villages or in their hometowns. The army regularly does construction work. It does road work, road building, road repair. It does. You see soldiers harvesting crops in the field. So and them in parades. Yes, sure. So they spend most of their time actually in productive kinds of work. Yes.
I have noticed that the North Koreans, when they came down to South Korea, there's some kind of love between the two countries.
Mm-hmm.
The North Koreans envy the South Korea because of the success they have achieved.
Mm-hmm.
Do they envy the South?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that if they were to unite, eventually North Korea will become a capitalist state.
Yeah.
So what is causing this not to happen?
Okay.
Are you happy with this unification or what?
Okay. So what? Yeah. So the United States does not want is worried about reunification because of the possible influence of the North on the South. I mean, even though the South's economy is much bigger, given the way that world capitalist markets value the two currencies, right? If we were to take away the bias, the world capitalist market bias in the valuation of the two currencies, the economies would not be that. The two economies would not be that skewed. But nevertheless, so let me go to the first question, which is whether or not North Koreans who go to the South envy the South Korean economy. They certainly do. I mean, when they see what South Korea looks like as a first world nation, they are going. It's really eye-opening for them, and but they also are understand certain limitations, such as the fact that things like education and healthcare are not free. Housing is expensive, and so as they learn about it, they will see that it's not a one-way street. There are pros and cons. There are pros and cons between these two economies.
Not everybody loves the capitalist system.
Right.
They don't want to get used by it.
Yeah, as far as reunification is concerned, so here's the proposal that we've heard consistently from the North, and there are groups in the South that also accept this model, and that is that for reunification, sure. I mean, if you think about reunification, there are are prior examples of reunification, such as Germany, right? But there is another model, and that is the Hong Kong model. So the Hong Kong model, when Hong Kong was annexed by China in 1997, is the concept of two systems, one country, or one country, two systems, and this is two systems economically and two systems politically for a transition period. All right. So the idea is that we'll bring these two countries together. The North will keep its socialist system. The South will keep its capitalist system. The South will keep its electoral political system. The North will keep its pyramidal political system. And these two will be brought together. There will be more and more economic exchanges. There will be more, Kaesong industrial parks, and this can take place gradually. You've got time is on your side. You can spend all the time you want to figure out how you're going to integrate these two economies, how you're going to, how these two economies and political systems are going to work together. So that's the concept. Yeah.
I hear that Kim Jong-un, above and beyond everything else, wants to ensure that he stays in power.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent is that really the case?
Yeah.
Would he be voted out of office by the appropriate executive
Mm-hmm.
committee?
Mm-hmm.
How strong is his hold?
Well, when his father died, a lot of people were wondering, how is this transition going to work? Because when Kim Jong-il, when his father took over from Kim Jong-un's grandfather, right? He was an adult. He was already experienced. He was already holding an office in the government, and so he was in a position to take on the responsibilities of national leadership. In the case of Kim Jong-un, he had no prior experience, and what we see is that there is a set of people who represent the continuity from one president to another, right? The equivalent of our civil service, and then the military, and the people in all the ministries, and so they were and that's why there was no real discontinuity in the transition from Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. And as to the question of whether he would fear being deposed in a pyramidal electoral system, it's actually hard to do. It's actually hard to do unless there's something really drastic like corruption or some real misgovernance. So.
Did you really have that guy killed because he fell asleep at something?
Well, it's possible. I mean, but I don't think it's a question of Kim Jong-un making these each one of these decisions. Remember, there's a deep state. There's a deep state here. There's a deep state there, and I think that the deep state has more to do with it than Kim Jong-un, right?
So the transition to power, at least in theory, might not have been governed by familial relation. It could, at least in theory, have gone to somebody else.
It could have.
But to preserve continuity, which is value to them.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here again. So the question is the fact that the leadership went from father to son, and then father to son, Is that a familial relationship? Is there, is that, what underlines the continuity of power? And I think that this again is the legacy of the emperor, right? And because that's the way it has always been done in Korean history, and so there's sort of a comfort. Yeah, it's a monarchy. It is a monarchy in that sense, and there's a comfort zone there, and there's also a feeling that the people are going to be comfortable with that, because they knew about the emperor.
But the deep state, they have more power than you. They might.
Oh, absolutely.
They're running it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because the deep state advises him. I mean, here's this kid, and how does he know what to do? The deep state advises him. It's the same thing as the White House, right? You can take Obama, a very idealistic president, gets in there, and then the generals and the CIA advise him, and he's stuck in this bubble. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Does the U.S. when this can distinguish attention in the peninsula, the Korean area, is it beneficial to America?
Is it beneficial, the tension?
Tension all the time?
Well, okay. So the yes and no. So the yes is that anytime there's tension, there's a pretext for stationing U.S. troops there. So there's guaranteed bases, right? And so for some people in the Pentagon, some people in the deep state, that's a good thing. Okay. Now we don't agree, but the other aspect of it is that wherever there's tension, there are risks, right? Because where there's tension, if there's a risk of war, it's going to affect the U.S.'s allies, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. So it's there's a double-sided game that is involved here, and yeah, good question. So I want to come back to the original question about what is it going to take to step back from this nuclear confrontation. Since WILF is a peace group, I think we need to address this question. One thing that we see is that North Korea, the North Korean leadership, is rational. Okay, and it is relatively consistent. Okay, so in 1994, there was a government in South Korea that was in favor of peace, in favor of reconciliation, in favor of reunification. And so there was and the U.S. was all involved in this also, in signing an agreement to reduce tensions, a kind of a mini peace agreement. And what they wanted to do was from the U.S. perspective, what the U.S. wanted was for North Korea to halt its nuclear program. So that agreement resulted in North Korea shutting down the Yongbyon nuclear reactor. Okay? And so for 8 years, North Korea abided by that agreement because they felt that there was a possibility of progress, that there was a possibility of reconciliation, and this would work towards a long-term peace. And this fell apart. It fell apart in 2002 because of escalating military exercises, a new government in Seoul, and then some unfortunate military clashes between the North and the South. And but the point is that North Korea has stated time and again that we are willing to give up our nuclear program if the United States will sit down and talk with us about peace, and we can have talks with the South about reconciliation, peace, and reunification. So and if the U.S. will sort of give up this relentless attempt to isolate and demonize the North.
We do want to take it over, don't we? Put our corporations
Well,
there.
that's a problem. That's a problem. If you want to impose our will, our system, on them, right? So the solution to this is that we have to recognize them as a people that have self-determination. Let the Koreans, North and South, figure out where they want to go as a reunified country, and every Korean knows that they have relatives or somebody that they know or used to know on the other side of the border, and so that's why there's much more positivity among Koreans for peace and reconciliation than there is from the United States.
I was just wondering if the starting of the negotiation now is a point.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. So the fact that we're having a joint team at the Olympics, the fact that the North Koreans are participating in the Olympics is a good thing. And a lot of times when diplomacy is difficult, it's sort of hard to get started. You remember how China opened up to the world was through the ping pong diplomacy, but even before that it was about the Asian Games and African teams. I was on the plane with some African teams going into China during the Cultural Revolution, and so it was sports that was the inroad, and then music and performing arts were the inroads to where diplomacy could not yet work, and so that's why I see this as definitely something very positive. Yes.
Another image that I see a lot is of nobody's trying to break into North Korea. Lots of people are trying to get out. That's the image.
Defectors.
Yeah. And is it analogous? Is the situation analogous to Eastern Europe, where everybody was trying to get through the wall?
Yeah.
Or is that part of the myth?
Well, I mean, there is some truth to it in the sense that there are more people who are trying to go from the north to the south than there are trying to go from the south to the north. Now, there are some people, including some whom I know, so one fellow is a professor well, he actually teaches in Pyongyang and Beijing and Tokyo, and he was from the south, but he was one of these people who was speaking about this history that we're not being told, and was not in South Korea it was not acceptable to talk about this history, and so he was forced into exile. So he cannot. He's South Korean, but he cannot go back into South Korea without being arrested. And hopefully that maybe the new government will change that. But so there is the same thing and we don't see as much, but partly because what we have in South Korea is a whole organizational infrastructure for luring defectors. Now, whether they're really defectors or not, but people who want to go from the north to the south. There's a whole network. It's NGOs. It's to some extent supported by government money, where defectors, if they come to South Korea, they're given housing, they're given support, and swarms of people descend on them to try to help them tell their story. And what comes out of that, of course, is that some of these stories are indeed exaggerated, and you get falsifications, which eventually come out later on, that some of these defectors are telling partial lies. What they want them to say, right? Yeah.
I saw one journalist talking to some people and there were a bunch of young kids, and they kept saying, "Why does America hate us so much? Why do they hate us so much?"
Right.
They're told that we hate them.
Well, again, that's a perception that arises because of the it's the embargo. It's the embargo, the refusal to recognize the country and its government. The stationing of, to this day, 28. Originally 37,000, but now it's still 28,000 troops on the other side of the border. There's this is the longest stationing of U.S. troops on foreign soil. Why is it there? So it's not, the perception is not unjustified.
I'm surprised that they're more afraid of us than Russia.
Yeah, because Russia doesn't threaten them. Russia does not have. Russia does not have.
We're always talking about Russia's trying to
Yeah.
take over.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
What is very significant is this. When North Korea agreed to participate in the Olympics, the South welcomed that right away. When you see the president of South Korea shaking hands with the sister of the North Korea, is very promising that they want, like their brother and sister, they are the same nation, same people. So it is in the interest not to have tension. So this is a very good sign. Participation, especially have you seen that she leaders from the north? They are very striking. She leaders came down and orchestrated music. That was very nice to see that.
Yes.
So that's hopeful.
Yes, it is very hopeful.
Yeah, very hopeful.
Yes. Absolutely. Thanks. Yeah. So. Okay. Okay, thank you. So these are. If people want any more information, there's some reading material here, which I can pass out. These are just two because
send it along, and then here comes another batch.
Yeah. You mean Korea? Korea is not. No. BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, China.
And South Africa.
That's BRICS, yeah.
So they're not trying to join in, or?
No, so these categories come about because of the size of the economies. These are behind the United States and Japan in terms of the less developed economies. These are the four really big ones. Yeah. And then I think, Joan, do you want to hand out these others?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, so there are more handouts coming.
More handouts.
Yeah, it's another one, and maybe I should pass these this way. Yeah. Okay.
Some directors say that the Kim Jong-un stars and people don't need any kids have to be valued, so we put stay alive.
Yeah. So
So I don't know why they're locked
yeah. So the only thing is that during the time of in 1996 that famine.
These are people who just.
I know. So here's the problem. So you've got these these NGOs in South Korea, and some over here as well, that are trying to demonize, and so to demonize, they take something that happened in the past and make it seem like it's still happening. So, and it's totally untrue. It's totally untrue. Yeah.
I need to talk to you as a spy.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's. I think.
Did you mention unions in North Korea? Is there any other unions? Workers' unions?
I don't. Yeah, I did not determine that because yeah. So I don't know whether there actually are unions. It's because in a way it's different from, of course, from the other countries like Cuba, China, Vietnam, where the unions are very much needed because there is private enterprise or because even the state enterprises engage. Well, I don't say that. I would prefer to use Fidel Castro's argument that you need to have oversight, right? I mean that's my own personal opinion is that oversight, it never hurts to have oversight, and
So, but you don't know for sure.
I don't know. Yeah, I did not encounter it. Yeah.
Have you seen my email?
Yeah, I saw it.
LAPA@library.
Instead of bombs, when we build schools instead of bombs. How I want to be in that number, when we build schools instead of bombs. When North and South can meet for sports, when North and South can meet for sports. How I want to be in that number, when North and South can meet for sport. When we make peace instead of war, when we make peace instead of war. How I want to be in that number, when we make peace instead of war.
Thank you everyone for coming. Sharat will be here, so hang out. And thank you. And you successful.